So this morning, I woke up from a dream where I felt like something was watching me from the corner of my room. For some reason, I knew it was vegan, but wanted to eat me anyway. Of course, I woke up and nothing was there. So that might not be too paranormal, but when placed beside this next bit, it might just appear that way. Every day, I eat two things at around 6 o'clock: a plate of chicken nuggets and a bowl of beef top ramen. Today, I'd run out of nuggets that I kept in the freezer inside the house. So I go to the outside freezer to grab the new bag, and to my surprise, there's no grab of nuggets. For one, I know I went grocery shopping for nuggets last week. It's in my effing diary. Right now, I'm just frustrated that someone else in the house ate my nuggets, or took them to some gathering. But before I ask anyone, I check every other fridge in the house. Nothing. So I go back outside to check every nook and cranny within the freezer, and they're just sitting on the top of the rack. Mind you, they're housed in a bag that is quite large and very yellow. I was also inside the house for not even a minute, and there would have been no way for someone to open and close that freezer without me hearing it squeak. Is the vegan monster real? Is it after my nuggets? I know this whole thing sounds funny, but man, that whole scenario was just strange. I grew up in a smallish town in Texas. I haven't lived there in a while, and apparently the town has gotten a lot bigger since, but the house that I grew up in still stands to this day. A little bit of backstory is needed, I guess, to really understand the situation. I grew up as a middle child, with sisters on either side of me. In the house that we grew up in, the kids' rooms were upstairs. On one side of the upstairs was my room, with an attached bathroom and a sink area that led into the game room. On the other side of the game room were my sister's rooms with their adjoining bathroom. Now, as odd and somewhat funny as it is, my family has always had a tradition of pranking each other on April Fool's Day. My sister used to prank me a lot because, hey, I was the only brother and they didn't know any better. Well, on one April Fool's, they decided to prank me by writing creepy messages on my bathroom mirror and making it seem like there was a ghost in my room. It freaked me out a little bit, only to have my sisters laughing at me from my bathroom doorway at the look of their faces. The thing is, however, it seems like events started happening from that night on to when I moved out of that house, and my family moved away a few years later. I remember it being about 1 in the morning, and I was passed out in my bed when all of a sudden the bathroom light flickered on. I groggily got out of bed to go turn it off, thinking that the light switch may have gotten switched on halfway or something. As I walked to my bathroom, I saw that the light switch was actually down in the off position, and after running to confront my sister, they were both snoring asleep. Yeah, and I never let them live that down when they liked to retell this story to me. So in a daze, I went back to my room only to find that the light switch was then up and the light was off, the opposite from what it was. I toggled the switch off and on, and it stayed off no matter what. This kind of freaked me out, but I ignored it and went back to bed, facing the wall in case the light came on again. The next day, I let my dad know what had happened, and he went to look at the light switch, only to see that it was working perfectly. This bothered me because I just knew that there was something going on with that switch the previous night. I shook off the weirdness and ignored it until that night. Sure enough, at around 1 a.m, the light switched on again, and this time, the door that led to my shower could then be seen slowly coming open. In sheer terror, I ran towards the door and flung it open, trying to see if anyone was there, only to see no one. Me being young at the time, I ran downstairs to my parents' room and told my dad that the light was on again and that something was going on in my bathroom. He came upstairs, irritated, and sure enough, both the switch and the door were closed and off, like they hadn't been touched. After a little complaining, I was told to just sleep in the guest bedroom we had, and that it'll be okay in the morning. For years, this continued. First it was the bathroom light, then it turned into my closet lights flickering on and off, then my bedroom lights would only last about a month before all going out continuously. On and off, and on it continued. Every time, I was the only person in the house that was experiencing anything. This all seemed to escalate over the years, until one night. My parents and sisters decided to go out of town for a weekend, and I was to stay with a friend who lived a block away. Unfortunately, he had something come up and I couldn't stay with him. So I stayed at home, in that creepy room, all by myself. To counter my nerves through all that, I mainly stayed downstairs, watching multiple movies and lots of TV. The last night that I was at home alone, I was on the couch in the living room with a red plastic cup of milk and some Oreos on the coffee table, watching a movie. As the movie wore on, I ate until there weren't any more Oreos left and the milk was all gone. When the movie ended, I looked at the clock and realised that my family would be home soon and decided to clean up. I went around and cleaned up a little and made it seem the way it had been when my parents had left. So no clothes or bedding on the couch, no dishes on the counter, etc. After straightening up the living room, I went back to the coffee table to put the red cup in the sink, only to see that it wasn't where I had left it. Puzzled that it was gone, I went walking around my house, even into the kitchen, and looked in the cabinet and the sink and still nothing. Frustrated and thinking it may have been my family, I went to the garage, no car, then went back in the house. And then decided that something was messing with me and yelled out, "Okay, funny joke, you got me. Come out now." No response. After waiting a little bit, I sat back down on the couch and suddenly then heard a crash in the kitchen by the sink. It sounded like something was thrown into the sink. I ran with my heart pounding into the kitchen, only to see that red plastic cup in the sink with milk droplets pouring into the drain. Seeing that made my heart pound even faster, and I ran out of the house onto our front porch and sat until my parents came home. I told them what had happened, and like always, they didn't believe me, and even searched the house thinking that there may have been an intruder. No one was found, and no windows or doors were opened until I ran out to the porch, which, in context, was small enough that if someone wanted to leave, they would have had to push me out of the way. I never really liked being home alone after that, and even became very OCD with certain things, like pushing against doors to make sure they were closed, or even just gently placing cups in the sink on their side so that they couldn't fall that way and make any noise. Years went on from here, and to my memory, nothing like those events ever really happened during that time, until I invited my best friend to stay the night one night, while my sisters were gone and my parents were out. We stayed up watching movies and playing video games in the game room and having a fun time. As it got super late, we eventually both called it a night and went to bed. Me sleeping in my room and him sleeping on the sofa in the game room. During the night, I remember getting a text from him asking if that was me. Not understanding what he was talking about, I texted him back. This went on for several hours, and in the end, we were both terrified, to the point where I slept on the floor in the living room to make sure we were both together. I remember the messages like this. "Yo, is that you coming up the stairs? I never heard you go down." "Huh? Nah man, I'm passing out in bed. What do you mean?" "Fuck you, I just heard you coming up the stairs." "Dude, come in my room. I'm in my bed. I haven't left my room since I got here." "Okay, not funny. Did you just walk down again?" "No, I'm in bed. What the fuck, yo? Come out here." As I opened my bedroom door, I could see the lights on in the game room and my best friend sitting up on the couch with a terrified look in his face. As I went to him, all he said was to sit and listen. So I did. Sure enough, a few moments later, footsteps could be heard walking up the stairs from downstairs, and then nothing. This made my eyes go wide, and my friend nudged me saying, "What the hell is that?" I had no answer because right then, the footsteps continued down again. I even counted how many stairs and compared it to the footsteps that I could hear, all but 2 footsteps. So as I looked over the railing of the staircase and saw nothing, I freaked out, and we huddled next to each other and then passed out until the next day. My best friend and I still talk about that from time to time, and I never had told him about any of the other stuff that had happened to me. We're both at this point of the same understanding that something was in the house. We don't know what or what provoked it from coming into the house, but something was there. What I never told my best friend was that one more thing happened to me that will make me never go near that house ever again. The day that I decided to move out, I remember cleaning up the last bit of the stuff in my room. At this point, it was a Monday, and I had taken off of work to clean out my room. I was home alone with my sisters both at college, and I was done for the semester, and my parents at work. While cleaning up my room, the handle of my bedroom door suddenly started to rattle violently. I jumped and yelled out, thinking that it was someone that had come home. When I went to the door, I even grabbed the handle, and you could tell that however or whatever was on the other side of the door was trying with all their might to rattle that handle. This scared the living crap out of me, and the next time that the handle went all the way down, I yanked as hard as I could and the door flung open. I had to even catch the door so as not to put a dent in the wall. Sure enough, upon investigation, no one was home. This creeped me out, and I spent the remainder of the time with the door open. Now for context, just outside of my room was a small landing and then the stairs. So when I then heard rapid footsteps coming out of the stairs a couple minutes later, this absolutely terrified me, and I shut the door once again to have some barrier between me and whoever was doing this. When I went to shut it, no one was on the stairs, and I would have seen them, but I closed the door anyway, to then have the door being banged on like someone was putting their fist to it. In shock, I sat in the corner of my room and waited for it to pass. The banging went on for several minutes, and when it stopped, I grabbed everything that was left in the room and walked out of the door cautiously. At the top of the stairs, I stopped and looked around. Seeing no one, I then just yelled out, "Hello? Who's been doing this to me? What do you want?" As I finished saying that, I felt two large hands push me from behind so violently that I almost went tumbling down the stairs. To keep myself from falling, I let go of everything I was holding, sending it down the stairs and whirled around, pissed off and ready for a fight. With no one there, I ran downstairs and out the door. The best part of this whole experience is that before shutting my back door for the last time, I yelled out, "This is over," and shut it. It's terrifying to me that after almost 10 years, I still remember everything so clearly. I never want to go back to that house, and with my parents having sold it and moving away, I don't have to. I just hope that whoever owns it now is not having the same issues as I did. To this day, I still have nightmares about these events. Whether it's me in my room and hearing footsteps and shadows walking up the stairs, or just having a normal dream and then the dream slowly turning to me being trapped in that room, with a terrible sense of dread and fear that something else is in there with me. I can't really think straight writing all this down because it just gives me chills. I'm glad to be able to share the stories with people that may believe me, because my family sure doesn't. All I know is that what I've told them, and to this day, I haven't told anybody about the push. Creepiest part of me is that now whenever the wind blows, a door open or shut, or a light flickers, I think about that house and all that happened, and I just become glad that's not where I am. Because as I said, it's over. Back when I was a small child years ago, I lived with my mother, brother, and grandparents. The house we lived in was very old, built around the very early 1900s. My mother lived there when she was a teen, and according to her, the previous owners were very old, so I assume they're deceased by now. Strange things happened a lot in that house. According to my mother, when my great-grandparents died, she would smell their perfume and cologne at random. In a way, they were still watching over us from the dead, which was comforting to say the least. But one day when I was around the age of 13 or 14, I was up till 3 a.m. playing video games. Everyone else was asleep. I heard footsteps out of my door, and I paused to check who it was. I thought it was my brother or one of my grandparents walking to the bathroom, but I didn't see them. I heard the footsteps again, but this time they came from the attic. The thing about the attic is that the door didn't have a doorknob. It had a keyhole, and once you opened it with the key, you had to pull the door open. The attic was locked. Some people asked me, maybe it was an animal? The footsteps sounded too heavy to be a tiny animal, and it was in the summer. Animals only came in the attic in the winter. Someone also asked me, maybe it was a homeless person. Kinda a silly question. There was no other way to enter the attic except through the door. The windows were too small for a human to climb through. I also felt a strange presence, as if someone else was in the house besides my family. My family said they experienced weird things in the house, and it was my first time experiencing something like that. I don't know the history of the house, only that it was built 100+ years ago. When I started high school, we moved from that house because the bills were skyrocketing, and my grandparents could no longer afford it. I'm now living in a house almost similar to my old one with my mother. We moved here around 2017. The owner of this house was pretty old too. She lived here when she was a child. Her daughter told us that originally her brother was going to own the house if their mother were to pass away, but her brother ended up passing away first, thus selling the house to us. Reason why I bring this up is because my mother and I have experienced weird things in this house. I would hear footsteps in the basement when no one was down there. I also felt a strange sense of discomfort every time I went to the attic. My mother also used to smell cigars late at night. Maybe someone was smoking outside late at night, but our neighborhood was quiet at night. The smell actually came from the attic. Later on, we found out from my grandfather that the son of the previous owner, who was supposed to inherit the house, died in the attic, and he was smoking before his last moments, which explains a lot. But that was when we moved here. We haven't experienced anything else since. I still feel uneasy when I go near the attic, but I guess it's because of the fact that someone died up there before I moved here, and that's probably haunting the house. That's my whole experience so far. I've been in this house for 4 years now and have yet to experience anything else. Neither has my mother. Once we started making changes to the house, like painting the walls, changing the floors, and getting rid of some things, that presence we felt slowly vanished. I was in Mexico at the time, at 14 to 15 years. I was in a camp program that was aligned with the Catholic Christian Learning Program. Anyways, the learning program was for practicing and doing confirmation, which is a Catholic tradition. Basically, one day at the camp, we had to go do our retreat to another church, since the current church which we practiced and went in at the time was being used for something of an event. I really didn't look into it, and didn't really care since I thought church was hella boring. Well, because of this, we got to go to a different church on a hill that's around the same rural area we are at the camp in. The church that we're going to at is abandoned and being remodeled right now, which is perfect for the retreat we were going to do since we wouldn't have to bother anyone. When the time came, me and one other person woke up hella late, and we had to get money to ride a bus to the church since our only source of getting a ride was the camp-owned cars. They weren't there obviously because we woke up late. Me and my friend both paid for a bus and then dropped down at a few churches. The longest story turned short. We missed a few buses and turned at the wrong church multiple times until we finally came to the right one. We entered the church through the front doors, obviously, as the actual retreat was through another door on the side that led to the basement. Anyway, we went into the door of the church's front, and there was the lobby-like room where you could see the altar and the seats through a glass-paned doorway. Every single exit inside was barricaded with furniture and tons of heavy items for some reason. I could understand because the church was remodeling, of course. The glass door was just tightly locked though. Besides that point, the thing that caught our eyes immediately was a tall, slender woman who seemed to be on her knees. I'm talking like a big Resident Evil village lady. The figure had a long dress and a venta black type veil over her face. She blended in perfectly with the darkness surrounding her. On the floor, however, it was what seemed like a Bible or a big book, with pages physically ripped out. The room was dark, so we didn't notice her figure at first until we started to hear her weep. We were startled and looked over and saw the woman turn a quarter of her face to us, so we only saw her cheek and nose. She looked like those witches. Her face was so much different from her dress, like a grey colour like Palpatine. I jumped back and ran out of the door with my friends, scared for our fucking lives. My friend started to wait for help, but I shut him up. I was so angry that we missed hella churches at the time that out of stubborn rage, I ran back into the door to scream at the entity. I jumped back in and the room was empty, and so was the book. Our teachers/proctors heard us wailing and causing commotion, and came up to pull on our ears and then drag us back to the retreat at the basement. When I spoke to my teachers about it, they laughed and said they thought we were joking, since they were there all day preparing for us to come in, and they were the only ones with the keys. After the experience, I like to think my friend and I were just angry and tired, and both hallucinated the same thing, since I hear that the darkness can cause that when looking into it for a long time. When I returned home, my mother and father told me it was La Llorona, a famous weeping ghost myth that supposedly lost her kids and roamed around crying for her children. When I was younger, I used to live with my grandparents and my parents in one house. Every one of my relatives had some type of weird thing happen to them in that house. For me personally, so many things happened, and I can't really explain it for what it is. It first started with my dogs being really weird. We had 2 small dogs, and they usually just bark at noises and such. One time, I had used the restroom in the downstairs area, where a hallway was where the washers sat. One of my dogs, Snowbell, was waiting at the door for me. When I opened it, she was sitting still and looked straight to my left side. I stared at the area, obviously seeing nothing, but I could somehow sense something. I froze momentarily before I ran away with Snowbell. Another time, she was barking crazily at the back door when I was trying to take her out, and I looked again to see nothing. Another time, I was with my grandpa in that living room area, and for some reason, school likes to teach kids rapid cup stacking, so I was trying to show him my tricks. I grabbed some styrofoam cups from a cabinet that sat next to that hallway that led to the bathroom, and I left the door of the cabinet open. Mind you, it is a rather big wooden cupboard, and that small door of the cabinet needs some force to close it. I showed him the cups and we sat for a bit, and there was a loud slam. We both looked to see the door close by itself. Really weird, as we looked at one another but didn't really know what to do. Since I was younger and my parents were working or any of the sort, I always slept in my grandparents' room with them. I remember blinking in the dark as my grandparents slept soundly, as I couldn't fall asleep so easily. For reference, their bed is in the centre of the room, with a bathroom in the corner on the left if you were to stand in the doorway. I would be on the right side of the bed and feel this energy coming towards me from the doorway. The first time I sensed it was strange, like I could feel it come beside me but not see anything. Then it would come to my side, and after a good minute, it felt like it punched me in the face, then walked away. After that, I kind of tested it, seeing what would happen when I covered my face, because the sensation of being hit in the face was really strange, like an imaginary pillow but still making contact. When I covered my face, I could sense it slowly going away, which was a small habit I had for a bit because I was scared to get punched. It was the strangest thing. In that house, my room sat at the edge of the hall upstairs. My mom said that used to be her room, and she saw a girl staring at her from the edge of the bed, which only freaked me out since that was now my room. I just remember going to wash my face in the upstairs bathroom, and the bathroom is small and feels claustrophobic, so I often left the door open if I wasn't showering or using the toilet. When I washed my face, I could see a dark figure coming into my peripheral vision from the hallway. When I looked directly in the hall, it would quickly go away. I swear I thought it was just my imagination, but I'm not so sure now after discovering shadow people. There was also a time my family members would hear footsteps going up and down the stairs and playing with the dogs, as the dogs could be heard from their collar clinging against each other. The hallway lights would turn off, even though the switch works and the bulbs are fresh. When you tried to flip the switch, the hallway light would just not turn on. Plus, the hallway is super dark already, so without the light, it's pretty eerie. Later on, being older now, I found out in my Laotian culture that it's good luck to raise ghost children, and putting two and two together on my grandma's small altar, with food offerings and the small chants she'd do. It all made sense in addition to my mom confirming so. So I guess the ghost may or may not enjoy my company, since I might have been the same age. I'm pretty sure my family might have said it was a little ghost girl. Now, I haven't had a paranormal encounter as much as this time, but it's truly the strangest thing I've experienced. This is the last ghost encounter I can remember having, and one of the scariest I've had. When I was 17, I went to live with my aunt in Massachusetts. She lived in this old house down a dirt road. It was surrounded by woods except for two other houses. This older creepy guy lived in one of the other houses. We caught him looking in our windows a few times, so we always locked all the doors. I slept on her couch for a while, since I didn't have a bed. Her dog would always sleep with me on the couch. There was this closet room off the living room. It had a door at the end of it that led to the outside, and a door that led to the living room. There was always something off about that room. We rarely used that back door. So one day, my aunt surprises me with a cot in this closet room. She felt bad I'd been sleeping on the couch and wanted me to have my own space. The first and only night I went to lay down on the cot, her dog jumped right on the cot too. I had made sure the back door was bolt locked, and the living room door was wide open before I lay down. I felt like something was really wrong, like when you get that pit in your stomach and know something bad will happen. I was trying to fall asleep forever. Then her dog started growling towards the opposite side of the closet, which is like 2 to 3 steps away from me. I'm facing the other side of the wall and I'm too scared to turn around. All of a sudden, I hear the door slowly swinging shut. Now, her dog is fully on top of me, growling at whatever is swinging the door shut. Then the boot steps start. I hear these heavy boot steps coming over to my cot. Her dogs are going nuts at this point, snarling and growling. I think it's got to be a murderer. I'm not even thinking ghost. At this point, I should have screamed, but I was at that point of fear where you're completely paralyzed. I remember hearing a whimpering sound that I'm pretty sure was coming from me. So it takes this guy like 3 steps to get to my cot, but it seemed like it took 20 minutes. Then he leans over and I can hear and feel his heavy breaths on the back of my neck. At that point, I'm feeling straight evil from this guy. I knew he was going to kill me. The dog starts going wild, barking like crazy. That's when I snap out of it and scream for my aunt. Her and her boyfriend come running in. They turn on the lights. No one's there. I'm crying at this point, saying I know there was a man right next to me. Her boyfriend ran around the house looking for some guy. Nothing. All the doors were still locked. There was no sign of anyone. I never went in that room again. I truly felt like I was in danger that night. When I was growing up, I would always see people that no one else saw. It didn't start scaring me until around 12. My best friend always sees things too. We ended up having a lot of creepy experiences together, but this one scared us the most. We were 13. She was sleeping over at my house. My brother always had pretty extreme night terrors, so when we heard a noise outside my room, we assumed it was him. It was definitely past 1 a.m. in the morning. Both my parents were sleeping, and all the lights were off in the house. When my brother would have these night terrors, I'd usually be the one to bring him back to his room. So we venture outside my room, down the dark hallway. We go into the dining room at the end of the hallway and turn on the light. There's a sliding glass door directly across from us at the other end of the dining room. The dining room table is in between us and the door. We both see a boy sitting on the edge of the table with his back turned facing the door. Something felt very off immediately, but we thought it had to be my brother. We both called out his name. As soon as he said his name, I started to realise this boy was way too skinny to be my brother, and his clothes were weird. Then I looked at the reflection in the sliding door. I almost shit myself. The boy's face was very skinny and sickly looking, and his eyes were huge and all black. He had the creepiest smile and was staring at me. This all happened within seconds, but felt like such a long time that I was looking at that face. My friend grabbed my arm, I looked at her, and she had complete shock and horror on her face. We bolted to my room, shut the door and started crying. Then we went over it together to make sure she weren't crazy. It still gives me the chills reading this out. Happened to me in my friend's house in 1992. There were 4 of us close friends in high school. One of our friends invited us to spend the night in his house. He was scared to be alone, since his entire family was going out of town that night, and he couldn't join them because he had class in school. He was scared to be alone because he said there were things happening in his house that he found strange. He then tells us a story of how their neighbour, a teenage girl, got demon-possessed, and a priest performed an exorcism and the girl was freed from demons. Afterwards, the family decided to demolish the house because of the bad memories. But my friend thinks the evil spirits transformed to his house. So all 4 of us went to his house for a sleepover. We started the day watching Top Gun, and as night came around 7 p.m, we stayed in his room, just talking and listening to music on his radio. We chose our favourite station, and the DJ would always announce the station name. DJ comes back on air, and this time says a different station name. We all looked at each other and thought about what just happened. We changed it back to our favourite station, and the same thing happens after about 15 minutes. We now start to worry and feel creeped out. Later that night, we felt hungry and decided we'd all get food together because we were scared. So we went to the kitchen and I went to the bathroom to wash my face. I wasn't worried since it was just about 6 feet from where my friends are. As soon as I finished washing my face and stepped out, the bathroom door slammed shut behind me. It was like someone who was angry kicked the door. It was that loud. I ran to my friends and I saw them huddled together, scared to their wits. It was funny but scary at the same time. The rest of the evening was just us 4 laying down in bed trying to get some sleep, but instead endured the rest of the night listening to footsteps outside our window. We never spent another night in my friend's house ever again. I live in the Philippines. I was born and raised in my grandparents' house. Big house with a large unfinished basement. Lots of weird things happen there. My grandparents emigrated to the US, leaving the house to their children. My mom's experience. She was cooking lunch one day, saw my aunt walking across the living room dragging her slippers, as she would always step on her flip-flops and drag them with her feet. So my mum cooked more for my aunt. She finished cooking and called out to my aunt, inviting her to eat. No answer. Realising she was alone in the house. Still my mum. She was cleaning our room located beside the basement stairs. Sweeping the floor, opening the door, and seeing a dark man without shirt and just jeans walking down the basement stairs. Again, find out she's alone in the house. My uncle also sees the same dark man without shirt staring at him from outside his room window. Window where the room is located is on the second floor of the house. Impossible for anyone to be up there. My experience was talking to my cousin one day in the dining room. Room above us is master's bedroom, currently occupied by my uncle. I go up and knock on the door to ask if I could watch TV in his room. No answer. Knocked again, still no answer. I go down and hear the doorbell ring. Went to open the main door. It was my uncle just returning home from work. My cousin's story. He was talking to my grandparents after they came back from the US. He looks toward the basement stairs and sees an arm waving at him to come near. Tell my grandpa about it. My grandpa's a man of Christian faith. He waits till it's 3 a.m, then goes down to the basement alone, in the dark, and calls out to whoever is haunting the house. See nothing, hear nothing. A brave man who fought in World War II. My cousin is the same age as my younger sister Zip. I'm 8 years older. I'm now 46 years old. All this happened when I was a teenager. My sister and cousin were playmates with my only brother, Dre. All this happened in the early 1990s. According to my cousin, they were playing in my grandmother's closet. Closet was inside the dressing room. Next room was the bedroom. It was my uncle who was using this room. He was a workout addict, built like Bruce Lee, and it was a Cali master and teacher. Anyway, while they were hiding inside the closet, they started hearing somebody in the bedroom using the jump rope. At first they thought it was our uncle doing his daily workouts, so they opened the closet door and took a peek. Well, the jumping stopped and they saw the jump rope on the floor. So they went downstairs to ask my mom if our uncle was home. She said no, he was not. So they asked who was using the jump rope. My mom said she had no idea and they were the only ones in the house, meaning my mom, my cousin, sister and brother. Just the four of them. Everyone else was either in school or at work. This one is a story by my other cousin, Rachel. She invited her friends over and they went to the basement. I can only guess it was out of curiosity that they went down there. But she said somebody started throwing pieces of crumpled paper at them, so they got scared and ran upstairs to the living room. His room was above ours. I think directly above ours. Our dorm rooms are long and narrow. Upon getting in, you have 3 connected bunk beds attached to the wall on the right, then cabinets and desks on the left. At the end of the room, opposite the door, is the window. Typically, 6 people occupy the room. Let's call the main guy in the story Jake. He lives in the city. Our campus is in the province, 2 hours away. One day, he randomly saw an old metal artifact of the street, and he picked it up. Amused, he put it in his pocket and brought it back on campus. We usually call those artifacts anting, and it's believed to grant the holder the power of invincibility, or some other kind of ability. But after he brought it to the dorm, strange things started happening to him. Some things I remember was he always sensed that someone was behind him, like close behind him, and when he goes up the ladder to the top bunk, he feels hands pulling his ankle down. At first, he's the only one who experiences this, but after a while, his roommates also feel it. Afterwards, they started hearing noise from the cabinets. I think it was either a banging noise or someone moaning. The last straw for them was about the huge body mirror they have attached to the door, when they suddenly found it hanging on the window, on the other side of the room. They all freaked out, so they went downstairs to the second floor and left the coin in the study area table in the hallway. As they get back to their room, they hear a small clanking metal sound. Alas, the artifact was suddenly under the bed. When all of this was happening, Jake was so stressed and had a glazed look in his eyes. He was so out of it. I don't know why he still has the artifact when all those things were happening. Maybe he tried to get rid of it, but he can't. After a few weeks, I heard that Jake moved out of the dorm and I never heard of anything about him since. I'm currently a 27-year-old male, but 6 or 7 years ago I was in college and had just joined a fraternity during my first semester. I don't necessarily need to, but it was fun in its own way. I developed a resolve during that next semester to fully explore spirituality. As an atheist, I wanted to see if there was anything worth pursuing or understanding before I committed to anyone's lifestyle. If I found nothing, maybe I could just define not giving a fuck since nothing really mattered. After doing some research, I decided to go into meditation through spiritual Satanism. I know, edgy. Firstly, I figured if people could commit heinous crimes under the name of Christianity, then people could do good as a Satanist. Basically, it shouldn't matter what you call yourself. Secondly, these people basically believed that Satan was a good dude for providing humanity with the apple, or consciousness. It didn't have anything to do with committing any evil or living life indulgently. The main thing you were doing was meditating to open your chakras, align your kundalini and reach your full potential as a human. The last part was a little conceited, but I rolled with it. Very much pulling from Hindu scripture. I kind of dug it. I spent months learning how to meditate, mostly eyes closed and visualizations. Eventually, I committed to chakra meditations, and that's when things got interesting. Firstly, my third eye. I would and direct the vibration of my voice to my forehead, visualizing light or energy pouring in and the eye opening. I did this every day for about a couple of weeks. Now was placebo. I really couldn't tell you, but nonetheless it definitely worked. I began to feel a pressure in my forehead as if a thumb or something was pressing outward. This happened especially if I focused on it in moments of intuition. Once it was open, I didn't need to do those ohming meditations because I could feel it 24/7 if I wanted to. I began to meditate on my third eye, sort of achieving a non-focus where I didn't try too hard but didn't lax too much. After a little while, a blue light would begin to pulse, and the longer I could hold that non-focus, the brighter it got and the faster it pulsed, until it fully covered my vision. If I could get to this point, what followed next were amazing detailed pictures of places, people, monsters, and all sorts of objects that looked as if they were directly in front of me. The blue light would form these objects. Usually I get too excited and lose my focus, but I was able to achieve this state multiple times. I should also mention that it's been years since I've meditated, especially in this way. And to this day, I can feel my third eye if I wanted to. Sometimes the feeling pops up randomly. Hopefully it's not just a brain tumour. The experience totally shocked me, and I began to piece together a different reality. Was I crazy? Is it just a placebo? If it exists, what else is out there? Does the government know about this? I began to see ghosts and weird subtle spirits, kind of periodic, but they would interact with me sometimes. There was a 2-week period where I would wake up to my bed shaking violently every night at 2 a.m, and something would stand at my bedpost. It was creepy, but I realised at this point I was basically a full believer that there was a race of beings that had my back, spiritual Satanism preaching, so I never felt like I was in real danger. Plus, these were known phenomena within what I was researching, and you were told to meditate and visualise shielding and protection, and pour energy into it to establish defence against any negative energy or spirit I had now become sensitive enough to see. This all culminated one night at my fraternity. We were throwing a huge party, and me and my buddies decided to have a good time. I was drinking and smoking weed, but nothing too excessive. I don't think at this point I realised how fragile my mental state was. I had basically opened up to a possibility that negative entities were trying to suppress me from realizing this knowledge. And they were warring with a race of good entities that wanted to free humanity. Suddenly, I felt immediately that something was wrong. A very ominous presence sort of surrounded me and I felt very threatened. The party was going on around me, so I lay down on a friend's bed in panic. My heart began to race and I felt something grip on me. I began to fight back by throwing up all my visualization defenses, but soon realized I was outmatched by whatever the fuck was happening. I genuinely was ready to die at one point. Then another presence, way stronger than the first, came and completely eradicated that feeling. The new presence was at first utterly terrifying. It was more real than anything I had known, and it saw through every part of me. Then the terror turned to a complete love, and I broke down. Maybe ego death of some sort. This entity began to talk to me telepathically as I was curled on the bed, soul to soul. It expressed that I should tell my parents how much I had fucked up that semester. Come clean. I felt it open my throat so I could vomit some of the night away, and I did and immediately felt better. I spent some time just in complete bafflement, and then suddenly it was moving. I felt amazing, as though I'd been eating salads for the last month and working out twice a day. The following month, I ended up turning to Zen Buddhism, realizing I strongly needed to ground myself. I also realized I was fucking terrified of ever experiencing anything like that again, and slowly shied away from it all until I regained some normalcy. I posted ontological shock in the title, because that's essentially what happened. I had my reality completely broken down and reformed, and it fucking sucked. But I truly think that in the long term, I gained a heavy advantage from it all. I saw something off last night. It made me stay up all night. Well, last night was like any normal night starting off. I was making some avocado toast in the kitchen around 9:30 p.m. As I'm doing this, my dog starts to bark in the direction of the field across the road, so I'm assuming he's barking at deer. Happens all the time. I saw this through the glass sliding door in the kitchen. So I ignore the barking because I can clearly see no one pulled in the driveway. But then I notice that this barking starts to become more frantic and loud. I walk to the door, and as I do, my dog turns towards the door and looks at me, and starts wagging his tail like he's excited that someone's there, which he never does when it's just someone looking at him through the door windows. He's very excited, like jumping around and wagging his tail. This dog is a Great Dane German Shepherd mix and is 13 years old, so I thought this was very strange and started looking into the darkness beyond the street lamp in my yard. Except, I barely had to look beyond the darkness for my eye to catch movement behind one of the cars in the driveway. It was still dark in the driveway, so it was hard to make anything else out. So as soon as I caught a glimpse of the movement, I got scared and quickly closed the curtain to the door, but left a little crack so I could see out the door still. I kept looking at the spot where I saw movement behind the back windows of the car. I didn't see anything for a hot minute and was about to leave when I saw what looked like a slim and small black shadow quickly poke its head over the window of the back of the car very clearly. I keep watching it almost slither back up and down the back of the car very slowly, but keep the gradual shape of what I thought was human. At this point, I was scared shitless, so I closed the curtains, turned off the kitchen lights, and bolted toward my bedroom where my boyfriend was sleeping. I'm 19 now, but this experience happened when I was 12. The night this encounter happened, everything was pretty normal. I was going back to school the next morning after summer break, so I had to be in bed earlier than I would have liked. I remember falling asleep to the movie Meet the Robinsons, amazing movie by the way, playing at probably around 10:30 p.m. And then I woke up and I knew I had to be late. But the first thing I registered was the TV, and it was completely scrambled. The image, I mean. Almost like a DVD that doesn't want to play, so it skips. But it was frozen, so the image was warped and boxy. Except the Meet the Robinsons movie DVD wasn't damaged. At this point, I guessed it was around 2 or 3 a.m. The second thing I registered were the voices coming from the kitchen. I got out of bed to see what was going on, because the voices were talking pretty loud and they sounded kind of panicked. When I got to the kitchen, I realised that it was my mom and older sister, who was 18 at the time, and they were arguing. The first thing I actually picked up and comprehended in the convo was my mom saying, "Those are definitely aliens. What the fuck else could they be?" She was almost hysterical. Neither of them saw me enter the kitchen, but I asked what was going on, and my mom looked at me and I knew that she was scared and shaken. She literally had tears in her eyes. She told me in an almost sad voice that there were aliens outside. At this point, we were all standing in the kitchen in front of our sliding glass door that looked out to our yard and the field across the road. I was confused, so she pulled back the curtain to the kitchen door, and I didn't see anything initially because I didn't look hard enough. But I saw my huge dog, a German Shepherd and Great Dane mix, sitting in the middle of the yard, in the direction of the neighbours, which was to my house's right side. I asked my mom why he wasn't on the porch like normal and why he was sitting so still. To that, she slid open the door very slowly to not make much noise, I assume. And usually when the door to the house opens, my dog will look towards the sound of it. If he's in the yard, which he was, but he didn't even look at us. His gaze remained undeterred. I didn't realise what was going on, but I was scared because my mom was clearly scared, as was my older sister. My mom signalled my sister and I to be quiet, and we were. You could, on a normal night, hear the animals in the woods or the trees and the wind and crickets chirping because it was summer. But that night, we couldn't hear anything. It was completely silent outside, not even a breeze. This gave me chills that made me shake. Something was terribly off. My mom shut the door, and my sister and I followed her to the bedroom, where my dad was asleep and the window was open. There she explained to me what was going on. She told me that my sis was in my room looking for something and peeked out the window. My room is in the back of the house, and my window looks out to the trees behind the house. She saw what she thought was a pack of coyotes, but there were about 30 of them, and the closer she looked, she started to see distinguishable features, and that's when she dipped out of my room and went and told my mom. My mom told me that walked outside, before my sister came to her about what she saw, and saw a tall, dark and slender figure walking down the neighbour's driveway towards our house. She thought it was the neighbour coming over for some reason, but she got scared suddenly and felt like it would be best to pretend to be asleep so she wouldn't have to talk to the neighbour. And those events lead us to go to the kitchen window that overlooked the two neighbouring houses right next to each other. It was dark, but we were looking very hard, and we could start to make out shadowy figures. Most of them were small and moved super fast. So fast that if you weren't paying attention, you wouldn't have noticed. And if you paid even more attention, you could see the slower, taller ones. They moved slowly and their silhouettes were darker than their background, but they were almost fluid looking. It just didn't look real at all. And this sucks, but we didn't even think about grabbing a camera and trying to catch pictures, which I regret just thinking back. Another thing I noticed is worth remembering, I think, was that beyond the neighbour's house, they had woods too. Well, within the trees and very low to the ground, there were 3 evenly spaced lights. One was green, the other red, and another blue, I think. The lights were pretty dim, but they were never there before. We watched out the window for about 10 minutes, freaking out. My mum was almost wheezing at this point, she was so shocked. After that, she took us into her room and opened the window more, which I didn't like. It made me nervous. She told us to keep quiet, and since we couldn't hear anything at all from outside, we sat in silence. Until we heard what sounded like a car passing on the road. And the engine sounded, but we could see the road from my mum's window and there were no cars. No headlights, nothing. But the engine buzz was loud and turned into sounding like a plane was passing over the house. That's how loud it got. This lasted about a minute or so, then it went completely silent again. And after a few minutes, would repeat the engine sound. After all of this happened, my mum shut the window and closed the curtains. And we sat in her room, all of us basically shaking. Anyway, another thing to point out was, I did eventually work up the courage to go back to my room. But that was a few hours later and was starting to get light out. The TV was still scrambled, so I tried to eject the disc and it wasn't working. So I ended up having to unplug the DVD player to get the scramble off the TV. That's about all that happened that night. But it freaked me out so bad that the only time I can speak of it out loud without crying is when I'm drunk. I don't mention it to anyone except the people I trust with my life. And even then, they sometimes don't get to hear the full story. But I want to know your guys' thoughts on this. Is there any rational explanation for things I saw? I went to a boarding school in the hills for 5 years before graduating from high school. My school was over 100 years old and the buildings we studied and lived in were even older colonial structures. When I was in the 10th grade, I stayed in a dorm that was a boarding house to Danish missionaries in the 1800s. The structure was a beautiful open yarn rectangular building, letting you look across the entire dorm of about 30 people just by standing outside your room. I stayed in room 12B, a larger room tucked away in the corner of the building, placed in between rooms 12 and 14. The room itself was more like two very small rooms with a connecting doorway, which seemed great at the time, seeing as it was more privacy than you'd get in a standard room with your roommate. The warden of all our dorm was a widower in her 40s. Miss Sarah, name changed for privacy, who had worked for the school for 9 years. She was a very religious, upright, but pleasant woman who would stay in a small attached apartment on the lower floor of the dorm. She lived alone. Her daughter was married and her husband had passed away in war. She was a generally friendly person, but I always thought she was a little too religious for my taste, despite me studying in a school founded by missionaries. We were required to turn in our laptops by 10, before lights out at 11:30. Like most boarding schools, kids mess around and break rules all the time, so it wasn't unusual to see her walking around, making sure everyone was asleep and no one was smoking in the bathrooms. I had stayed up quite late watching the newest episode of Game of Thrones that night and found myself needing to go to the bathroom around 2 a.m. I peeked outside my door to make sure Miss Sarah wasn't out and about, and when the coast was clear, I dashed down the hallway to the common bathroom at the end of the hall. After finishing up there, I made my way down the hallway back to my room when I saw lights on in her apartment. I ran back to my room and got into bed. I could hear her walking upstairs, up and down the halls, but I planned to stay under my covers and pretend to sleep until she went back downstairs. I then heard my door open. I proceeded to hear footsteps towards my roommate's side of the room. At this point, I was a little irritated because it wasn't weird to see her open the door, peek in and close it, but it was odd to me that she would walk into a seemingly quiet room at 2 in the morning. I could hear her humming a song under her breath, and I grew more nervous for some reason. I was just waiting for her to leave. I heard her footsteps again, but this time she made her way to my side of the room. I had my covers over my head so I couldn't see, but I could feel that she was standing right next to my bed and staring down at me. At this point, I could hear her singing a hymn, more clearly and more loudly. She stood there for about 3 minutes, just singing while standing merely inches from my head. I held my breath for what seemed like hours, thoroughly weirded out by what she was doing. Eventually, she stopped singing and made her way out of the room. I waited for a few minutes before pulling back the curtains to the window, pointing inside my dorm. The lights were in the shared computer room and I saw Miss Sarah, wailing and singing the same hymn loudly. She was crying and holding her head in her hands, singing the song between sobs. It was loud enough for me to hear 4 rooms down, through 2 closed doors. As I was about to head back to bed, the wailing stopped and she stood up. I ran back under the blankets, not mentally prepared to deal with whatever was going on with her. Something really unnerved me at the time, and I struggled to fall asleep that night. 3 hours later, at 5 a.m., I woke up to head to my rowing practice and reluctantly made my way to her apartment to get the keys to the front gate. Her door was ajar, and the framed portrait of her husband was shattered on the ground. I grabbed the keys and left quickly. She ended up taking the week off and returning as though nothing had happened in the first place. She ended up retiring that year. As an adult now, I try to justify what happened that night. Maybe she was grieving or going through something deeply personal. It still doesn't make sense to me that no one heard her singing and crying except me. Or that she stood and sang by my bed. There have been reports of few possessions and suicides that took place in our school. And it's very long history, I should add. And from the stories Miss Sarah has told me, 2 had taken place in our dorm, and 1 in particular had taken place in my room. 15-year-old me was positive it was a similar occurrence. There are many more weird and unexplainable things that took place during my stint at boarding school. This one is maybe explainable, but overall too odd to write off as a normal occurrence. I've always been able to see shadow people. For the most part, they're in my peripheral vision, but sometimes they're right before me, in sharp relief. I know it sounds odd, but it's true. They've never harmed me, never attempted to touch me, but they're just there. I think they're mostly benign. But there are other things, not so inclined towards goodness. These are the demons that sometimes follow me. Again, I don't expect you to believe me, but this is the first time I'm telling anyone about all this. Besides my family and closest friends, so please bear with me. I've had some pretty scary experiences with the latter. The one that always jumps out to me is from 8 years ago. For context, at the time, I was a radio producer in a web radio in Greece, where I live and am from. And my program was from 8 to 10 p.m. every Saturday, playing rock and metal music. That night, I had finished my program as usual and was walking home. It was sometime in winter, either late December or early January, because there were still Christmas decorations out. The street on which I lived was parallel to the boulevard, but at that time of night, and with it being so cold outside, it was really nice and quiet for once. So there I was, enjoying the night air and the lovely stillness, when I heard steps behind me. I stopped and looked behind me, but there was no one there. I shrugged and kept walking, thinking it was probably my overactive imagination. That was until the steps started again. I resolved to just keep the same pace. Besides, I was only about 50 meters from my house. After all, it could just be someone who got out their house, even though I'd hear no door opening or closing. I was determined to rationalize it and keep calm. And then the sound of the steps changed, and it sounded like hooves. 2-legged hooves, at that. That's when I knew it wasn't my imagination. It was a demon. My heart rate went right up. My hands started sweating. I ran the last 20 meters to the entrance of the apartment building, and only after closing the door behind me did I dare to slow down and breathe normally. Nothing came by on the street. It was gone. Whatever that demon was, I'm glad I never looked back. It was there just to scare me, I knew it. That's what they like to do to me, scare me shitless. And they play a good game of chase or hide and seek sometimes. I know it sounds like too much, but I wanted to ask, has anyone ever had any similar experiences? What's your story?